A lonely Apache saves a young woman in the river, not knowing what awaited her. Nevada Territory, autumn of 1875. The inside of the carriage smelled of rosewater and dust. Charlotte Beaumont sat stiffly between trunks of linen and lace, her gloved hands resting on her lap as the wheels groaned beneath them. Outside, pine trees blurred past, golden leaves drifting in the wind. Somewhere far behind her was New York. Somewhere ahead was California, and a marriage arranged by men in suits who'd never once asked what she wanted. "I still don't see why I must marry him," she muttered. "Because your father promised it," said the older woman beside her. "And because you are no longer a child, Charlotte." The driver called from the front. "River crossing ahead, hold tight." The coach slowed as the wheels dipped into shallow water. The riverbed was muddy, swollen from early autumn rains. Horses whinnied, uneasy. Then a howl, followed by another. From the trees on the far bank, a blur of gray surged forward. Wolves, a whole pack, snarling, running straight toward them. The horses reared. The lead animal slipped. One of the wheels sank into the muck, jolting the carriage sideways. Charlotte screamed. "Dear God!" The coach rocked violently. Then, crash. The carriage tipped and splintered. Charlotte was thrown sideways. Her back struck the wooden wall. Then, water rushed in. Cold, choking, merciless. She was under water before she could draw breath. Gowns tangled around her legs. A trunk slammed into her ribs. She kicked, clawed upward. Her head broke the surface just once before the current dragged her downstream. Branches tore at her sleeves. Her bonnet vanished. She gasped, choking, reaching for something, anything. Then darkness. She woke, coughing, mud in her mouth. Her hands clutched wet earth. The river roared behind her. She tried to move. A stabbing pain in her hip made her cry out. Her dress was heavy, soaked. Every inch of her skin ached. A low growl echoed through the trees. She froze. There, 3 wolves, slowly approaching. Eyes gleaming yellow, heads low. They spread out, circling. Charlotte crawled backward, her arms gave out. She could barely whisper, "Help me." The first wolf crept closer. A sharp whistle. A sudden thunk. An arrow struck the ground inches from the wolf's paw. It snarled, recoiled. Another whistle, another arrow. The pack halted. Then silence. The wolves turned and fled into the trees. Charlotte blinked through tears. And saw him. A tall figure emerged from the forest shadows. Leather clothes, long black hair, a bow still in his hand. His face was unreadable, calm, not cruel but not kind either. She gasped, crawling backward again. "Please, please, don't hurt me." He said nothing, only looked at her. Then, slowly, he knelt. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was deep, accented, foreign but careful. She stared at him, unable to speak. "I won't harm you," he said. She flinched as he reached into a pouch and pulled out a blanket. He draped it over her shoulders without touching her skin. Then, without another word, he lifted her. She tried to struggle, but her body betrayed her. She was too weak. He carried her through the woods, up a narrow, hidden trail, until they reached a small cabin built into the slope of a hill. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, it was dim and warm. A fire burned low. Animal hides lined the walls. He laid her gently on a thick blanket beside the hearth. Then he fetched a bowl of water and a cloth. She whispered, "Who are you?" He didn't answer. He dipped the cloth and pressed it gently to her forehead. "Rest," he said. Then he sat a few feet away, silent, watching the fire. And for the first time since the river swallowed her world, Charlotte breathed without screaming. The morning light crept through the cracks in the wooden cabin, soft and golden. Charlotte stirred beneath a heavy wool blanket, her body aching with every breath. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the scent of smoke, pine, and something earthy, roots perhaps, grounded her in this strange place. She sat up slowly, gasping at the sharp pain in her hip. Her dress had been dried and folded neatly beside her. She wore a simple linen shift, unfamiliar but clean. A bowl of water sat nearby, along with a tin cup and a piece of rough bread. Her eyes darted around. He was there, sitting by the hearth, turning something in a small clay bowl with a carved wooden pestle. He looked up. "You wake," he said plainly. She stared, heart thudding. Where am I?" "Safe," he replied. "Mountain." The voice answered, "Who are you?" He stood and crossed the room, placing the bowl near her. "Drink," he said. "Helps pain." She looked at the dark liquid inside. "What is it?" "Root." "No poison," he said, voice dry, almost amused. She hesitated, then took a sip. It was bitter, but not unpleasant. "You saved me." He nodded once. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly. "You were drowning. Wolves were hungry. No good to leave." Still, she looked at him closely. "You don't even know me." He knelt beside her, not close enough to touch. His eyes were dark, steady. "Don't need to." He stood again and walked to the far wall, hanging a satchel on a hook. She noticed something then. His movements, silent, smooth. He didn't stomp or fidget like the men she knew. Every step seemed part of the ground itself. He took a blanket, rolled it out near the door, and lay down with his back to her. Charlotte watched, stunned. "You're not going to question me or ask why I was in the river?" "No, you rest. Tomorrow you walk." There was no sarcasm in his tone, just fact. She lay back, puzzled. No one had ever told her to rest without strings attached. Not her governess, not her father, not even the doctor when she had the fever as a child. Later, when the fire dimmed and the wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin wall, she turned slightly toward him. "What's your name?" He didn't move, but after a pause, his voice answered from the dark. "Atsa," she repeated softly. "What does it mean?" "Falcon," he replied. She smiled faintly. "I like that." Silence again. She turned on her side, cradling the wool blanket to her chest. The fire crackled. Outside, a coyote howled somewhere in the canyon below. And inside, for the first time in days, Charlotte felt something strange. Not comfort, not peace, but safety. A quiet, solemn safety she didn't understand, and didn't yet trust. But it was enough to let her sleep. The days passed without names. Charlotte stopped counting them. Time flowed differently in the mountains, not by hours or clocks, but by smoke rising from the fire, by the way sunlight filtered through pine needles, and by the quiet rhythm of survival. Each morning, Atsa brought her fresh water and checked her bandaged hip. Each evening he returned with rabbits or trout or roots pulled from the rich black soil. He said little, but his silence was not heavy. It left space for breath, for healing. Charlotte moved slowly at first. The pain in her hip dulled, then faded. One morning she managed to walk to the cabin door with the help of a carved stick Atsa had shaped for her. He watched from a distance, saying nothing, but nodded once when she reached the threshold. "I made it," she said softly. He didn't smile, not fully, but something softened in his expression. By the end of the week, Charlotte was stirring stew with a wooden spoon, watching Atsa clean fish outside. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. She pointed when she wanted salt. He handed her thyme when she frowned at the bland taste. Their eyes had become a language. One afternoon, she asked, "Why do you live alone?" Atsa didn't answer at first. He was sharpening a bone knife by the fire, his hand steady. Then he said, "My people are scattered, some taken, some killed, some lost to white world." He paused. "When I was boy, I was taken too. Soldiers. 3 moons I stayed in cage." Charlotte froze. She looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. What did they want?" she asked gently. "Names, numbers, things I did not know. They beat me when I said nothing." Her throat tightened. "How old were you?" 13. She reached across the space between them, not touching, but leaving her hand open on the floor. "I'm sorry." He glanced at her hand, then met her eyes. "I did not die. So, I live." She nodded slowly. Later that night, as they sat beside the fire, Charlotte opened up. Her voice was soft but clear. My father arranged my marriage to a man in California. I've never met him. All I know is he's powerful, older. He wants a wife to look pretty and keep quiet. Tatsa didn't speak. He added a log to the fire, watching the flames grow. I was in that carriage because I was doing what was expected, she said. But I never wanted it. Still, he said nothing. Finally, Charlotte sighed. I don't even know who I am anymore. Tatsa stirred the embers. Maybe you find out here. She looked at him, really looked, and nodded. The next morning, her skin felt warm, too warm. By midday, she was shivering under the blanket, her face flushed, her breath shallow. Tatsa knew. He moved quickly, crushing roots, boiling herbs, soaking cloth in stream water. He sat beside her, wiping her forehead, pressing water to her lips. Charlotte murmured in her fever, Mama, Mama, please don't go. Her voice cracked, tears slipping down her cheeks. Tatsa didn't interrupt. He stayed beside her for hours, watching over her as the fire burned low. When she cried out, he held her hand. When she called for people who weren't there, he listened like a guardian of her ghosts. On the second night, the fever broke. Charlotte stirred, opened her eyes, dazed. The first thing she saw was Atsa, sitting on the floor, back against the wall, eyes half closed in exhaustion. You stayed, she whispered. He opened his eyes fully. You are strong. She swallowed hard. I didn't feel strong. You survived, he said. She blinked at the ceiling, voice barely audible. Thank you. He rose to his feet slowly and placed a cup of warm broth by her side. She took it, her hand still trembling. He watched her, quiet and steady. And that night, as she drifted into sleep again, she knew one thing for certain. She was not alone. Not anymore. The morning was colder than usual. The sky was washed pale blue, and a light frost clung to the leaves like memory. Charlotte wrapped the wool blanket around her shoulders as she stood at the edge of the clearing, watching Atsa strap his bow across his back. Where are you going? She asked. South Ridge, he replied. Saw smoke yesterday. Could be old, but I look. She hesitated. You think it's them, the ones who attacked the carriage? He looked toward the trees. Maybe nothing. Then he glanced back at her. Stay here, fire low. Don't answer sound unless it is me. She nodded. It was evening when he returned. His steps were heavier than usual. He didn't speak at first. His eyes were distant, focused inward. Charlotte stepped toward him. Did you find something? He reached into the leather pouch slung over his shoulder and slowly pulled out a piece of fabric. A handkerchief, embroidered with golden thread, CB. Her initials. She pressed her fingers to her lips, eyes wide. That was in my trunk. They're all gone? She whispered. Atsa nodded. No bodies? She asked. He shook his head. Just pieces. Scattered. Carriage broken. Clothes, books, trunks, all left to rot. Charlotte turned away, arms hugging her chest. Her breath caught in her throat. I thought maybe someone would come, she said. Silence. Maybe my father would send men, she continued, her voice growing thin. Or my fiancé would send a search party. She trailed off. Even as she said it, she knew how foolish it sounded, how distant those names felt now. Atsa sat on a log, watching the fire crackle. No one is looking for me, she murmured. No, he said simply. The words should have broken her. But they didn't. They clarified something. She knelt beside the fire, staring into it. Teach me, she said. Atsa frowned. Teach what? To survive. He tilted his head. You are surviving? I want to do more than survive, she said. Her voice was steady now, stronger. I want to know what to do when the fire goes out, when you don't come back, when I'm alone again. Atsa studied her face. She didn't flinch. Without a word, he rose and stepped into the cabin. When he returned, he held something wrapped in a dark cloth. He unwrapped it slowly and held it out to her. A knife. Not large, but sharp and well-balanced, the handle wrapped in worn hide. This is not for killing, he said. This is for cutting, carving, making. Only use it to defend, never for anger. She took it. The leather felt warm in her palm. Heavy. Real. "I understand," she said. Their eyes met. Gone was the frightened girl from the riverbank. What stared back at Otsa now was someone different. Someone who had lost everything and chosen to rise from it. That night, Charlotte didn't cry. She cleaned the knife carefully, placed it by her side as she lay near the fire, and stared at the ceiling of wooden beams and smoky shadows. She was no longer waiting for rescue. She was becoming her own. The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. There was a rhythm now. At dawn, Charlotte rose before the fire burned hot. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and followed Atsa through the tall grass and pine. He walked ahead, always a few paces in front, pausing just long enough for her to keep up. "This one," he said one morning, pointing to a low bush with purple berries. "Good for cough." She knelt beside it, running her fingers over the leaves. "What do you call it?" He tapped his chest, then said slowly, "Nili." She repeated it, careful with her tongue. "Nili." He nodded once. Other mornings, he showed her how to build a fire from damp bark, how to stack stones so they held heat through the night, and how to carve notches into branches to trap small animals. Charlotte's hands blistered, her fingers fumbled, but she never stopped trying. At night they sat by the fire with bowls of stew or roasted rabbit, the silence between them no longer awkward. It had turned into something steady, like the sound of wind through needles. "You speak more than I thought you would," she said one evening, smiling. Atsa raised an eyebrow. "You listen more than most people I've met." She laughed, short and warm. "I suppose we're both surprises." He stirred the fire, the glow flickering across his face. "You teach me your words," he said. "I teach you mine." She agreed. Each night after that, they traded sounds. She pointed to her hair. "Hair." He touched a strand. "Talij." She smiled, repeating it. He corrected her, gently. And as they built this shared vocabulary, something deeper formed. A bridge not just of words, but of trust. One afternoon, as they sat side by side skinning a rabbit, Charlotte asked softly, "Do you ever miss your tribe?" He paused. "Yes, but they do not miss me." "No, not." He wiped his knife on a cloth. "After soldiers took me, I was changed. My people said the white men poisoned my soul. They feared me, feared what I'd seen." She looked at him, heart sinking. "And the soldiers?" "They called me savage, less than a man." Charlotte shook her head. "So you belonged nowhere." He said nothing. They sat in silence, fire popping beside them. She reached over, touching his arm lightly. "You do now." Atsa didn't pull away, but he didn't speak either. That night, after dinner, they sat on the log bench outside the cabin. The stars shimmered overhead. Charlotte's voice was quiet but unwavering. "When I was 13, she said, my father told me I would marry for the family's benefit. That love was a childish notion. That duty was what made a woman valuable." Atsa listened, his gaze steady on the fire. "I was promised to a man I'd never met, a man who wanted a wife like a painting, quiet, beautiful, still." Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. I smiled. I obeyed. I wore the right dress, I spoke the right words, but I couldn't breathe. Not really. A long breath passed between them. Then she looked at Atsa, directly, openly. Election of Sedonia, Florida, board fights. But, here, now. I breathed for myself. For the first time, Atsa's eyes softened visibly. He looked at her not as someone fragile, not as someone to protect, but as someone who had begun to own her breath, her voice, her place. They didn't touch. They didn't speak again that night, but they sat side by side until the fire turned to embers, watching the stars in shared silence, the kind that only grows between people who are no longer strangers, but not yet lovers. Something deeper was taking root, not fast, not loud, but real. By now, the sound of Atsad's footsteps on damp pine needles was as familiar to Charlotte as her own heartbeat. She no longer waited in the cabin for him to return. Instead, she rose at dawn and followed. Not side by side. He always walked ahead, but never too far. He didn't slow down for her. She didn't ask him to. The forest had its own rhythm, and she had begun to learn it. Each morning began with a lesson: how to sharpen her knife on river stones, how to listen for the difference between a squirrel's warning call and a hawk's descent, how to tell fever root from poisoned vine. Each plant had a story, Atsa said, and if you couldn't read it, it could kill you. She watched the way he moved, how he walked differently on moss than on gravel, how he avoided stepping on brittle twigs, how his eyes scanned the sky more than the ground. One day he stopped and pointed to the side of a tree where the bark peeled in strips. "You see?" She leaned in. "Claw marks?" "Bear," he said. 2 days old, going east. Charlotte touched the gouges lightly. "How do you know where it's going?" He smiled faintly. "I asked it." She laughed. For the first time, her laughter didn't sound out of place here. In the afternoons, they returned to the clearing, and Charlotte practiced what she'd learned: building small fires with dry needles and river stones, carving notches into trees to mark safe paths, soaking herbs for poultices. Atsa rarely praised, but he watched, and he kept watching. At night, they sat across from each other by the fire. The silence between them was no longer the space between strangers. It had become something else, a quiet that pulsed with meaning. Charlotte had begun to see it in his eyes. When he handed her a knife, she felt the brush of his fingers, deliberate and lingering. When she passed him a bowl of soup, her hand paused just a second too long. Still, they didn't speak of it. Not until one night, when the wind had turned colder and the fire crackled low. Charlotte stirred the embers with a stick, her eyes following the sparks. "Have you ever been in love?" she asked quietly. Atsa didn't respond right away. He looked into the fire, then at her. "When you love someone," he said slowly, "you do not run when you are afraid. You stay." Charlotte's breath caught in her chest. She turned to face him fully. "I think I'm in love," she whispered. Atsa blinked. Then, just as softly, he answered, "I think I am, too." No one moved. The fire between them flared, then settled. They didn't touch, didn't smile, but something passed between them, not just words, but a kind of vow. In that moment, they became something more than two survivors. They became each other's home. And even though no hands were held, no lips met, Charlotte felt something ignite in her chest, not the wild heat of sudden passion, but the deep warmth of something earned, something real. A slow-burning fire, one that would not be put out by distance, fear, or silence, only by trust. In time, the wind had shifted. It carried a different scent now: smoke, iron, and sweat. Atsa knelt near the stream bed just after sunrise. The ground was damp, soft from last night's rain. His fingers traced the fresh indentations in the mud, boot prints, deep and narrow, not moccasins, not Apache. 3 men, he murmured, heavy, armed. He followed the tracks a few feet further and found hoof prints beside them. Horses, not wild. The tracks led northwest, toward the edge of the forest, where his cabin stood hidden. When he returned, Charlotte was kneeling in the garden, gently pressing a sprig of mint into the soil. Her braid was loose, her sleeves rolled up. She looked like someone who had always belonged here. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. She noticed the change in his face immediately. "What is it?" she asked, rising. Someone was near the stream. Men, white, not trappers. Charlotte's heart skipped. How many? 3. On horses, heavy boots, guns. She stepped closer. "What do we do?" Atsa looked toward the hills. "I will wait, watch. If they come near." He trailed off. Then he faced her. For the first time, there was fear, not for himself, but for her. "If I do not return before night, you take food and water. Go to the river. Follow it downstream. Do not stop. Do not turn back." Charlotte shook her head. "No, I won't." "You will," he interrupted. "This is not bravery. This is survival." She swallowed hard. Then she nodded. That afternoon, the forest grew quieter. Even the birds fell still. Charlotte stayed in the cabin, crouched low, a knife in her hand. Her heart pounded with every rustle of leaf. Outside, somewhere in the brush, Atsa waited, hidden like a shadow, bow in hand, breath slow and deliberate. They came just as the sun began to dip. 3 men on horseback, dirty coats, stubbled jaws, guns strapped across their backs. One wore a red bandana, another chewed a toothpick, the third had eyes that moved too fast, like a rat. "Looks like someone lives here," the one with the toothpick said. They dismounted. Atsa stepped out from behind a tree, silent as a ghost. "Turn around," he said. The men paused. "Well, hell," the bandana man laughed. "Look what we got here, a redskin in the woods." "We just want a fire and maybe a piece of meat," said the third man. "Ain't asking for much." "There's nothing for you here," Atsa said, calm and cold. The man with the toothpick took a step forward. "Don't be rude now, we're just travelers. You got shelter, we could pay." "No," Atsa said. Toothpick grinned. "You going to make us leave?" He took another step. The string of Atsa's bow tightened with a low creak. And then, whistle, thunk! An arrow struck the dirt an inch from the man's boot. He froze. Silence stretched across the clearing. "Jesus Christ," one of them muttered. The grin vanished. The 3 men looked at one another. Then slowly, hands up, they stepped back. Toothpick spat. "Ain't worth it." Bandana sneered. "Savages got teeth." They mounted up. As they rode off, one of them shouted over his shoulder, "You'll regret this, Red Man. We don't forget." Their voices faded into the trees. For a long moment, the clearing was still. Then Charlotte burst out of the cabin. "Datsa!" she cried. "Are you hurt?" He turned toward her. "No." She ran to him anyway, eyes scanning his arms, his chest. "I thought they shot." "I didn't let them." Her hands trembled. He looked down at her, then at the spot where the arrow still quivered in the dirt. She followed his gaze. "You could have killed him," she whispered. "I've killed before," he said quietly, "but not today." Her throat tightened. "Why not?" He didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "Because someone needs me alive." Charlotte stared at him, tears rising in her eyes. He had every reason to kill, pain, loss, memory, but he had chosen restraint. Not out of weakness, but out of something far more powerful. Love. And for the first time, she saw what it cost him to be gentle, and how fiercely he guarded that choice. Since the day the trespassers came, Charlotte no longer kept her distance. She followed Atsa closely now, not just in the forest, but in every task he took on. She no longer hesitated when he handed her a tool or pointed toward a line of trees needing clearing. She worked beside him to patch the cabin's roof, braced logs against the storm winds, and fixed the crooked fence that kept wild pigs from the garden. Atsa didn't comment on her changes, but she saw it in the way he passed her the better knife, in the way he stepped aside so she could lead a trail, in the way he let her decisions stand. Charlotte had learned the forest's voice. She could tell when a bird's cry was warning and when it was welcome. Her fingers knew the dry crack of good firewood from the useless. She tied snares with confidence. She no longer asked, "What should I do?" Instead, she simply did it. One morning, Atsa watched her from the tree line as she knelt beside a deer track. Without a word, she pointed to the slight indentation and said, 3 hours old, heading north, probably male." He nodded. She smiled. That evening, they sat by the stream, eating roasted fish wrapped in leaves. The air was cool and sharp with pine. The fire's light flickered across their faces. Neither spoke for a long while. Then Charlotte leaned sideways and gently rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't move. Her voice was low, soft against the hush of flowing water. "Do you ever think about losing me?" Atsa didn't answer right away. His body stayed still beneath her, but his hand tightened on the stick he held. "Yes," he said finally, "but not the way you think." She looked up at him. "I do not fear wolves," he continued, "or rivers, or fire. I fear you leaving, not from death, from choice." Charlotte's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He turned slightly, enough to meet her eyes. "But your world, it will come. They always come." She shook her head. I don't belong to that world anymore. Atsa studied her, searching for the shadow of doubt. There was none. She took a slow breath, then reached for his hand. Her fingers slid into his, firm and sure, no trembling, no hesitation. He looked down at their hands, at the way hers fit within his, and something shifted in his chest. He closed his fingers around hers, tightly, like a man who had once lost too much and now finally dared to hold something again. For a long time they sat like that, two figures on the edge of a fire, surrounded by trees, sky, and silence. They did not kiss. They did not make promises. But in that moment, they crossed something no map could show. She was no longer a girl who had been rescued, and he was no longer the man who only knew how to live alone. Together, they had found a language beyond words, one made of shared glances, long silences, and a single hand held without fear. And in that quiet wilderness, love became real. The wind was gentle that morning, carrying with it the scent of cedar and the crisp hint of autumn. Charlotte stood at the edge of a rocky outcrop, above the tree line. Her eyes narrowed against the sunlight. From this height, she could see far, across the valley, across the thinning gold of the forest. And there, just beyond the tree's edge, a glint of metal. Then, movement. 5 riders emerged along the low ridge. No rifles, no uniforms, just riding coats, clean boots, and straight posture. Easterners, unmistakable. She heard a voice call her name. Charlotte. The sound cut through her like a wire. Her breath caught. It was a voice she knew. Her cousin, maybe, or one of the house servants who had traveled with the carriage. Familiar, from another life. She didn't run, didn't crouch or hide. She simply stepped behind a large stone and watched in silence, heart steady. They scanned the woods, unsure. They lingered for a few minutes, then turned their horses. Soon they disappeared back into the trees. She remained still, long after they were gone. When she returned to the cabin, Atsa was crouched by the hearth, coaxing a flame from the embers. His back was to her, but she knew he had heard her approach. He looked up, their eyes met. He didn't speak. Charlotte sat down beside him and stared into the fire. I saw them, she said quietly. They were calling my name. Atsa didn't ask what she had done. She stared at the flames, voice low but certain. I didn't answer. Still, he said nothing. Charlotte placed a hand over her chest. I've lost everything I was supposed to be. A daughter, a wife-to-be, a lady. She turned to him, and in losing it, I found this. I found you. Atsa stood slowly, reached into the worn pouch he kept tied at his side, and pulled out a strip of hand-tooled leather. Attached at its center was a smooth blue stone, shaped like a drop of river water, polished by time. He held it out to her. This is not a white woman's ring, he said, but if you wear it, it means you stay. You choose this. You choose me. Charlotte's throat tightened. Her eyes stung. She held out her hand. His fingers were steady as he tied the band around her wrists, knotting it twice. Then, in one quiet motion, he pulled her into his arms. You are my family now, he said. His voice was deep, sure, unshaking. She looked up at him and kissed him, not a timid brush, not a question, but a true kiss, full, fierce, free. That afternoon, they climbed to the highest point of the ridge, where the sky opened wide and the valley unfolded like a breath. There they spoke vows in the words they had taught each other, a mingling of Apache and English, syllables imperfect but heartfelt. Atsa pressed a palm to her chest and said, You live in my fire. Charlotte touched his forehead and replied, You walk in my sky. Together, they carved into the old cedar behind the cabin, the shape of a soaring eagle, and beneath it, the letter C. No minister, no gown, no crowd, only 2 hearts that had wandered long enough. That night, beneath a vault of stars, Charlotte lay beside the fire, with her head on Atsa's chest.